So we are going to welcome our next guest, or our first guest, up on stage, a good friend of ours. We partnered with ChurnZero earlier this year to help produce the 2024 State of Customer Success Survey. And this morning, we are going to show you the first of those results. Nobody has ever seen this before. So everybody, give a round of applause for our friend, Tsang.
Good morning, everyone. Just want to, all right, so there's a QR code. We actually just dropped this. It is the 2024 Customer Success Leadership Survey. And we've done this for 5 years now. So let me talk about, but before I talk about that, I'm Tsang. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ChurnZero. We are a customer success platform. Hopefully, some of you are familiar with customer success platforms. Hopefully, some of you are logged into a customer success platform sometime today. And we basically help bring the tech to help your teams be more effective in understanding your customers. And there's we're here, a lot of our peers are here. Investing in tech is a big part of, I think, what will make you successful. And I also want to thank Monica, John, and Junana. What they're doing is really hard. They've been at it longer than I have, and I've seen customer success communities come, and I've seen customer success communities go. So building one, keeping it fresh, bringing a lot of people together is just really, really hard. So I just want to thank them for doing that, and I really hope that they continue to do that, and we will support them. A lot of us in the vendor space, we have our own conferences, and they're really fun and they're really great, but there's nothing like a, sort of an unaffiliated group doing CS meetups. So this is fantastic. I'm glad you're here. All right, let me talk a little bit about the 2024 CS Leadership Study. It's our 5th year doing it. It's the largest. We have over 1,000 respondents. And some of our sponsors and co-sponsors include, of course, CS Week, and also Gong, SaaStr, 6 Sense, right? So a lot of folks who are helping us do this. And let me actually step into what's happening. All right. So the last 2 years have been tough, right? And in fact, the last 2+ years have been tough. If you're in CS, you're likely in SaaS. And if you're in SaaS, the last 2 years have been really tough. And by the way, you're not alone, right? I think, if you turn to your neighbor on the left, ask them how it's been the last 2 years, and you turn to your neighbor on the right and you ask them how they've been the last 2 years, it's going to be tough. And if it wasn't tough for them, that person needs to buy you a drink tonight, okay? So those of you who don't have it tough, you better, we're expecting drinks from you. But for most of you, it's been tough. So let's talk about the ways that it's been tough. It's clear that net revenue retention has gone down, and it's gone down steadily since 2022. It kind of reached a high point around 2021 and 2022. Everyone was buying software, budgets were free. It all makes sense. So we've seen a real sort of steady decline over the last 2 years. There's been a lot of studies. I would say, just to get the math around, and most folks have seen a 10 to 15% decline in their NRR, okay? And look, it kind of makes sense, right? Like I would say, talk to your new salespeople. How are they doing? They're not doing great, probably, if you're in SaaS. Once again, if they're doing great, buy us all a drink. But they're generally not doing great, and that has implications for you as well, all right? Because when you are trying to get NRR, you're trying to expand, you're trying to cross-sell, you're trying to get new budget. So you're facing a lot of the same challenges that your sales teams are as well. So it is tough. Now, by the way, you're part of the problem as well. So 66% of you, your teams, have delayed your own purchases in the last year. So these are purchases that you've planned, that you want to do, but that you're holding off on at least 3 months. 66% of you, okay? Once again, by the way, this is actually fairly flat over 2023. So if you're delaying your purchases, it makes sense that perhaps your customers are also delaying their purchases. So this is actually interesting. We watch this one very closely because, if everyone spends, that means interesting things are going on. CS Ops. CS Ops is, first of all, I think probably one of the most important new roles in CS, right? Well, yeah, so any CS Ops people, you're in a great spot, except last year, it's kind of tough last year, okay? So last year, because it's a new role, oftentimes it's sort of the last in, first out, 10% fewer organizations had a dedicated CS Ops member. And that's tough, right? And that's just tough. Cost cutting, what happens, once again, last in, kind of first out. That said, I think what's really important is that mature companies, folks who've been around for a long time, tend to be a little bit bigger, tend to be higher in the maturity curve on their CS. They kept their CS Ops, okay? They kept them around. So to me, that really says, hey, if you have a mature customer success team, you are going to invest in your CS Ops. And by the way, I encourage you, that 10%, that's gonna go back up. Okay, that's a cost-cutting measure. Maybe panicked, it's gonna go back up. All right, look, this is what most people. These are 4 stock indexes. Okay, so 4 stock indexes. The one with the yellow line, the yellow pointer, that is NASDAQ, that is the Dow Jones, and that's the S&P 500. That's what most people feel. Right, so this is the last 3 years. It kind of went down. Everybody was freaking out, but it's actually mostly back. Right. So for you, maybe your 401k feels okay. Maybe your spouse's 401k feels okay, or you feel good, maybe even. But somehow at work, it doesn't feel as good, right? And the reason why is that the 4th stock index here is the SaaS. It's called the EM Cloud Index, and it's SaaS stocks only. Okay, and SaaS stocks are down 50% still from its all-time high, still, right? So this is what you're feeling, while the rest of the economy, right, to what it's worth, right, like indexes, stock indexes don't tell the whole story, but it does give you a good vibe. While the rest of the economy has some decent vibes, SaaS has not, and this is sort of the reason why. Now, you may say, hey, it got really too high, and it did. It got really too high, and so therefore a fall is inevitable, but we're too low, okay? And we're bumping along the bottom. In fact, one of the things that's happening as well is that, you can see private rounds are also dropping, but they're starting to tick up a little bit, okay? So this is private venture rounds. Many of you are funded. If you're not funded, you may want to be funded. It's actually ticking up a little bit. Good news, okay, stability's here. We're bumping along the bottom, okay, but there's actually some stability. And the road to reacceleration, you have to stop decelerating to reaccelerate, okay? So we're in the process of stopping the deceleration, okay? That's actually calculus. I kind of remember that from college. That's actually calculus, but it's happening. All right, a couple of things. Budget cuts are a little bit less common. Budget increases are also less common, year over year. Year over year, fewer of you are growing your budget, so fewer, that's not great news. But the good news is that fewer of you are cutting your budgets, and most of you are staying static. Okay, so most of you are staying static. All right, I'll take that. I mean, that's basically stability, okay? So what happens, hopefully that continues and growth will come back, right? But right now, that's happening. Headcount's also doing the same thing. Fewer of you are cutting. In fact, the percentage of companies that are cutting headcount has dropped by 40% year over year. Also, the hiring isn't really back yet, but stability is back. So the light blue there is basically stable growth, okay? So once again, we want to see that. We want to see that going along the way. All right. This, I'm not a big fan of this stat. So last year, we hit a peak. 2023, we hit a peak. 50% of your teams, CS, reported directly to the CEO. 50%, and that was a high. When we started this, it was probably in the 20s, right? So it was great, great movement. This year, 43% of you report to the CEO, so a drop of 7%. The majority of that went to the CRO, okay? So basically, there's been a chunk of you who used to report to the CEO that now report to the CRO, okay? So that's a little bit of reversion. I mean, people do have this argument about where CS should report to. I do think we should think about ourselves as a business function, a revenue function. I prefer, of course, for all of us to report to the CEO, and I think that has to be your goal for those of you in this room. But we took a little bit of a step back. Once again, consolidation, trying to, get fewer headcount probably was the reason for that. But I'll be watching this one pretty closely. All right. 51% of you own the renewal revenue, own it. That's very stable year over year. I guess the good news is stable. I think the bad news is that this should be 100%. Okay, this really should be 100%. It's going to take time for us to get there, but it ought to be 100%. But at least it's stable. An interesting caveat, 15% in 2023, new sales owned it. And they lost a chunk in this new survey. The new survey, it went from sales to a dedicated renewals team. So there was this rise of a dedicated renewals team in 2024 that owned renewals. So they may actually report in the CS. It may just be a very dedicated team. So we're actually seeing some specialization there. I find that interesting. It's not enough for us to comment on this year, but think about that as a sort of a rising trend of a dedicated renewals team. 41% of you own expansion. 41%. That's also very stable. And also, what I said about sales moving to a dedicated expansion team, we also saw the same thing happen with expansion. A chunk of expansion went from sales to account management. Okay? So there's this interesting thing about, things moving from new sales over to, an account management team or not. So I find that to be quite interesting. All right, and investing in CS, right? So it's been fairly stable. The interesting thing is that organizations that have a higher NRR, so a higher NRR, are investing more, okay? So investing more. So it makes sense. If your NRR is fantastic, you really should double down. But all to say that if you're successful in your job, you're going to get more investment, right? And so that's really sort of, where the dollars meet the road, right? So you really have to focus on that. All right, a couple of things to think about. Actually, I'm going to skip this one. I want to talk about charters. So we ask CS teams, what's your charter? And it's actually really stable. It doesn't change much year over year, right? Number one is onboarding. Number two is adoption. Number three, goes between renewals and whatnot, and then also expansion. I think renewals and expansion should be 1, 2, 2, 1, right? Everything else, I think, really, of course, adoption matters. I talk about adoption a lot. Okay, my wife is sick of me talking about adoption. It is super important. It actually does, of course, lead to renewals. Of course, it leads to expansion. And so, but you ought to be thinking about renewals first, right? Because that's really the outcome you're looking for, right? Expansion. So if you have a charter and if you talk to your teams and you say, hey, 2025 is about this, I think it ought to be about renewals and expansion. And then you maybe talk about, well, how do we get there? Well, we need to fix our onboarding. Okay, we need to get better adoption of our products from these folks. Okay, but you start with your charter of expansion or GRR or NRR, whatever's really important for you this year, and then the other things go below that. So I just want to make sure that, just get the order right, because if you get the order right, your seat at the table is going to be ensured, okay, if you get the order right. Okay, strategies. So we asked you, hey, these are sort of common best practices, CS strategies you should be doing. How many of them you got done? Not a lot, okay? Not a lot. There's a lot of things up here. Percentage implemented is really low. CS, you do a lot. There's a lot we're asking of you. There's a lot you need to do. And there's a lot that's not getting done, okay? So part of this is actually the maturity of the department itself. Part of it is just the sheer number of things that we're asking you to do, okay? But I think one of the things you really have to think about is like, hey, what are the programs that are really important to us? How many of these can we get done? I'm going to add another one, by the way. We had a new question about AI. Okay, so AI, are you trying AI? It's getting better. Every year there's more of you doing it. In 2024, 50% of you have already used AI in CS. Of the remainder, 2/3 are going to try something in this year, and then like 13% of you overall, you have no plans to do AI. Stop it. You got to do it. I mean, I know you're sick of hearing of it. I'm sick of talking about it. I hate talking about it. This is the only time I'm going to talk about AI on this stage because I'm sick of talking about it. But my goodness, if only 50% of you have done something, you really have to do it. It's a miracle. It's a near miracle with all kinds of flaws that will get better. Okay, so that's my only AI. I'm done talking about AI. I would not say those two letters all day. All right, except maybe I will. All right. Okay, so the SaaS recession shook CS a little bit, right? You saw some of the numbers. It shook SaaS, overall. But it crowned the revenue retention metric, okay? So I just want you to think about that. The metric that you are all really care about, you're really fully responsible for, is now crowned. And what do I mean by that? Well, I've been doing this for a few years, and the revenue retention metric used to be like an by the way metric. So you'll talk to an investor, goes, you're in your 5th conversation, they gave you a term sheet, and they're like, by the way, what's your revenue retention like? It's like, it's okay, it's not bad. It's like, okay, all right, we're all good. And then it started becoming more important as people understood, like, well, that's really important. So it kind of makes it onto the chart, it makes it into the board deck. Now it's a qualifying metric. It's one of the most important metrics that will be asked of you to see if you're a good company, okay? So we're actually pretty friendly in the CS space. So Nick Mehta of Gainsight was at SaaStr, and I was at his event, and he said he had a similar quote. In fact, he was talking to some of his investors, and he asked them, hey, tell me about GRR. And so this is actually not uncommon. It's like, hey, if I had to really understand the health of a company, what metric am I going to use? GRR is actually one of them. Okay, so I think that's super important. And in fact, if you take a look at public company analysts now, so this is a deck from a public company analyst, and you can see how many times they mention NRR. Okay, so it is a metric that they put on their slides, they talk about to evaluate public companies. And in fact, others, this is another public company analyst, they're actually putting NRR into their databases, right? So into their database, which is, by the way, not easy because not everyone reports on NRR. It's also not easy because people calculate NRR in different ways, which is kind of weird, but it's not a GAAP metric, right? So that's something we're going to have to solve. We're just going to sit down and solve this. Maybe, we just can all do that and really define NRR so it can be apples to apples. But even when it's not apples and apples, folks are doing it. All right. So look, the path is not easy, okay? Because we're building the next great department in the enterprise, right? This is the newest, the next, and by the way, I think it's going to be the greatest because you're going to be owning the majority of the revenue in your organization, right? Like you're defending the customer assets, the most important assets. So the path is not easy, but I'll tell you, there is no world where customer success does not exist in B2B SaaS, right? The headwinds came, actually no, CS grew up in a time of like abundance and money. Everybody just lived large for a few years. The headwinds are here, they came, now we're battening down the hatches, but retention and revenue are at the forefront. It's going to be fantastic. There is no world that CS does not exist. So congratulations on being where you are. I hope you have a great rest of the day, and we'll bring this back to John.
Stage,